discrimination. So wonderful to have you, Dr. Suganya, with us. Over to Suganya. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shashikalaji, for this wonderful introduction and for your kind words. Very happy to be here giving this talk. And hello, everybody. I would like to begin by thanking everyone who's present here to listen to this talk. Yes, Shashikalaji, I will be trying to speak about philosophy, but based on the text, because I'm a text-based scholar. Okay, let me begin then by sharing the PowerPoint. So I suppose it is, just give me a second. It's here. Yeah. Can you see the slides?
Yeah, it's coming up.
Okay,
yeah.
Very good. Very good. Excellent. So let me begin for the moment with an event that took place a couple of weeks ago and take it from there. The Samata Murti of Swami Rāmānuja was unveiled, as many of you probably know, and visited also by many prominent people, including heads of state, religious people, and the common people as well. And many of them gave speeches, and they spoke about what an equalitarian Rāmānuja was, how impartial and fair he was. And then maybe if you didn't watch those speeches and you don't know why this Rāmānuja is called a Samata Murti, you might wonder, fair and impartial in what field? How do we know? What's the evidence? Is it textual? Is it historical, inscriptional, hagiographic? Well, all the speakers who spoke, I think, mentioned how Rāmānuja propagated a mantra or a secret or whatever, it doesn't really matter, that he learned from a teacher with much difficulty. And the teacher had made him promise not to propagate it, without thinking too much. But still, Rāmānuja went ahead and at the cost of going to hell himself, gave that secret meaning to the other people so that everybody is saved, everybody is liberated. Except that everybody who spoke at this event a couple of weeks ago said that to do that, he climbed up the Gopuram of the temple in Tirukoštiyur so that everybody can hear what he had to say and that everybody can be saved. The actual story is not quite that. Even the hagiographies say that he actually taught them in a private space for anyone who was interested, and that is very important, not the general public. Anyway, hagiographic texts have other stories as well that show that he didn't discriminate against people based on their births. But in what field, once again? In what way? Did he think anybody can do anything, whatever their varna or ashrama or some such thing? Not quite that. Let's have a look. Now, these texts, well, I know that hagiography is generally not considered by at least the academics as a reliable source for establishing historical facts. But still, I think it can be very useful, especially as a starting point. There are a few examples that you find of how he was an open-minded and inclusive, a benevolent teacher and leader he was. He is said to have initiated women. We have a whole list of women disciples. We can see the picture of Kongil Pirati, for example, who was quite a cheeky woman, I think. Also, he had lower caste, outcasts, whatever we know them as lower caste, outcast disciples. And he even went out of his way to reform, for example, Pillai Uranga Villidasar, whom he said to have been very, very fond of. And then there was this other person, this young boy, who could not hear or speak. So he could not hear or repeat the mantras or understand their meanings. So what Rāmānuja did was place his feet on the head of this person, thus ensuring that he gets liberation through the physical contact with himself, meaning with Rāmānuja. And he's said to have had disciples of all ages, from all walks of life, whom he initiated and taught to throughout his long life. So, what we glean from these stories is that he did not discriminate based on caste, age, gender, wealth, physical fitness, or original religion, you name it. He wished everyone to obtain liberation. So it is when it comes to liberation that he was extremely open-minded. He thought that no one should be excluded from the possibility of getting liberation, so long as they wished it, and at least so long as they did not oppose to the idea or oppose his helping him out, because he wasn't going to go and forcefully convert anyone. That was just not him. So he was impartial when it came to ensuring moksha for all the people who were willing, or at least non-obstructing people. So a few questions arise here. What is moksha for Rāmānuja and the Vishishtadvaitins by extension? How to achieve it? And what does Rāmānuja say about helping everyone be liberated in his own writings? Because so far we've seen only, the hagiographic sources mentioning this thing. Okay, I'm sure many people know all this, but I thought I should perhaps just begin before answering the few questions that I just posed, maybe we'll need to have a quick look at this very basic, very, very basic, and it's not exhaustive in any way, basic things that we need to know about Vishishtadvaita, although I'm very, very sure everybody knows about this. So the Vishishtadvaitins believe in the existence of three tattvas, the three realities. So you have the Chit, which corresponds to the sentient entities. They are numerous. It's not just one, it's many. And all three of them, they are tattvas, they are realities, they are all real. There's nothing that is illusion here. So these sentient entities, they are numerous. They are Narayana's possessions. They have different kinds of relationship with Narayana. So they are also his servants. They are even, they also make up his body. And then comes Achit. So that's the insentient entity. The insentient entity is used by the Chit, but it also makes up Bhagavan's body. And then finally, you have the third tattva, Ishvara. So that's the supreme being, and there's only one, and that is Narayana. And according to this sampradaya, he is beginningless, he's endless, and he is changeless, he is flawless, and he possesses many, many, many qualities, including physical qualities like beauty, and Chitta and Achita are his body, as I said before. I won't go into details here, otherwise I'll never get to my talk, and anyway, I think it's not very essential to my talk here. And then there are two worlds, the Nitya Vibhuti, which corresponds to Vaikuntha, which is the locus, which is the geographic location of moksha. So basically, if you want moksha, Sri Vaishnava thinks that he ought to get to Vaikuntha. And then there is Leela Vibhuti, it's the realm of play. And Leela Vibhuti corresponds to all the other places outside Vaikuntha. So including this world in which we live, and both the worlds are real. So nothing is unreal here. And as I said, moksha in this philosophy is leaving samsara, which we get into due to our karma, which we've had since time immemorial, since forever, and leaving samsara and reaching Vaikuntha, where the Jivatman is able to perform eternal service to Srimannarayana. It's not just going there and enjoying when Apsarasas dance. No, it is going there in order to perform eternal service to Srimannarayana in all possible form, etc., just as they wish. So, but okay, this is all fine, but how do you get to moksha? What is the means to achieving moksha according to Rāmānuja? So that's the next important question. And the answer to this depends, if you're going to read, if you're going to seek the answer based on Rāmānuja's works, then obviously it's going to, we're going to have to look into his works, but not into any detail. So 9 works are accepted by both schools of Sri Vaishnavas, you know, the Vada Kalais and the Ten Kalais, i.e. the northern school and the southern school, as being Rāmānuja's works, as authentic works. These 9 were never historically contested. Some of them have been contested, the authorship has been contested recently, but not proven conclusively. So anyway, for this talk, I will just presume that he's the author of all 9 works. And among his 9 major works in white here, as you can see, these are 2 of them are bhashyas, and one of them, Vedartha Sangraha, is it sort of replaces his bhashya for the Upanishads. It just gives the essential meanings of the Upanishads. What he mentions in these, what I call Vedantic works, is Bhakti Yoga. So he mentions Bhakti Yoga. And Bhakti Yoga, as you probably know, it is using Bhakti as a means to achieve liberation. And this normally is reserved for the Traivarnika Upanita, which means that you have to be a Brahmana, Kshatriya, or Vaishya male who has been invested with the sacred thread. So it leaves out more than half of the population, meaning women, and also the non-Traivarnika Upanitas. And on the other hand, you can also see that in the Gadyas, these works, I like to call them the Sampradayic works. In this, he speaks of Prapatti Sharanagati, especially surrender. What surrender means has been discussed by scholars, and I think I should not get into that either. Maybe it's not very clear. Some people think this is a parallel means to get to moksha. Some people think, no, it is an ancillary means to perform Bhakti Yoga. We won't get into that. Anyway, he mentions apparently these 2 means, and technically speaking, this surrender, this Sharanagati is meant for everybody, not just for the Traivarnika Upanitas. So this would be a very nice thing, technically speaking. So, but Rāmānuja doesn't say explicitly that this is open for everybody. He simply says that everybody ought to perform one's Varnashrama Dharma. So how do we know what he thought about the topic of liberation for all who were interested? So what could be the basis for portraying him as an all-embracing leader? And one way to go about this is, in order to learn more, is to examine what his immediate disciples wrote. So he had thousands of disciples according to hagiographies, and a handful of them actually wrote very important works, and one of them is Aruḻāḻa Perumāļ Emperumāṉār. Now, Aruļāḻa Perumāļ Emperumāṉār, Aruļāļa for short, I think this is quite a mouthful actually. He was known as Yajñamurti before. He lived around the 11th, 12th centuries, actually. The dates are always a matter of doubt. He's said to have been an Advaitin ascetic, according to some stories already at the beginning, from the Andhra region. And he invited Rāmānuja, he challenged Rāmānuja for a debate, and he was such a scholar that he debated with him for 17 days, and Rāmānuja thought he was facing defeat and he was going to embarrass Bhagavan by losing. So by divine intervention, he manages actually to defeat. Actually, Aruļāļa concedes defeat even before Rāmānuja presents his arguments, because he realizes that Rāmānuja has come back with divine arguments. So he willfully embraces, I won't use the term converting within especially the Vedantic belief systems. He just switches from Advaita to Vishishtadvaita, and he starts learning from Rāmānuja. And the Guru Parampara Prabhavams, the hagiographic works, say that he composed the 2 poems, Jnana Saram, which is supposed to be 40 poems that gives the gist of the essential knowledge that one ought to know. And then Prameya Saram is just 10 verses. It just tells you about the Prameya, he who ought to be known. Okay, the subject of knowledge. Now, I think Aruļāļa was an extremely important figure. He was extremely influenced by Emperumāṇār, so that is Rāmānuja. So he actually bore half of the name of Rāmānuja. There's also a story about that, but I'm not going to get into that. And he has had a great impact on later acharyas, especially of the Tenkale school, the southern school, like Pillai Lokacharya and Arage Manavada Perumāļ Nayanar, who was Pillai Lokacharya's younger brother, important, very, very important thinkers of the 14th century. And there's also a commentary by Manavada Mamunigal, another extremely important thinker of a century later, who's written a commentary on this. I will not really get into details about them. I'll try to mention them time and again, especially if I have the time. I have a timer here to make sure that I don't go beyond my time. But this is just so very fascinating. Anyway, let's begin by focusing on his poem, and let's see what he says. So here's the plan. How do I hope to proceed? First of all, I'll look at what he suggests as the means to moksha. Okay, and then move on and see what he thinks are obstacles to getting that moksha. And then finally to see, to focus on the question of moksha and the question of discrimination or open-mindedness, however you see it. But of course, I will deal with all these bits also in the first two parts. And in the process, hopefully, I might point out actually a few exclusively Vishishtadvaitic ideas that might be of interest to everybody. So the means to moksha, that's our first part. One of the first things that Aruḻāḷa mentions is the importance of detachment. This doesn't come as a surprise for the students of Vedanta, right? So let me read out this verse and let's see what happens here. If all these good sons, wife, faultless kindred, house, land, cattle seem like trouble and burn like scorching fire, to such people, residence in the heart to ascend Vaikuntha will become easy to achieve. So when things are good, you have a good wife, good children, good friends, family, etc. Even then, if you think that, oh my God, this is dangerous, this is troublesome, let me be detached, well, that is a very good sign because, well, first of all, if things don't go right, everybody's awful to you, it's easier to be detached, right? But no, here it's when everything is fine. If you still feel detachment, it's a wonderful thing because it'll put you on the path to moksha. Because attachment to samsara is directly opposed to the idea of achieving Vaikuntha. So samsara and attachment to friends, family, etc. is something that one needs to give up. That does not necessarily mean that you should become a renouncer. He doesn't say it out loud, but presumably what he implies is that one should continue to do one's duty, one's karma, but with detachment, without expecting anything, without getting attached. So we can see that this can be practiced by anyone, right? Not just by the Traivarnika Upanita. And we also notice that Vairagya is essential, definitely, as it makes the path towards moksha easier, but it is not the means per se. But then what is the means then? Well, in another verse, let me read the verse very quickly, the translation that is. Will there be prolonged sorrow suffered from being born again for those people who have reached his feet, meaning Narayana's feet, knowing firmly that he, the Jivatman, is his possession, and that he, meaning Narayana, who came and appeared in northern Mathura, is the possessor of the soul. So this verse suggests that the end of sorrow of samsara occurs when we gain the knowledge that the Jivatma is the Swam, is the property of God, and Narayana Krishna is the Swami or the master, highlighting thereby one of the many different types of relationships that join the Jivatma and the Paramatma. Later on, I think Pillai Lokacharya will even compose a work called the Navavidha Sambandham. So there are 9 types of them. And this knowledge that we are the property of Bhagavan and he is our master leads us to his feet. So, and that is, I think, a euphemistic way of suggesting Sharanagati, of speaking about Sharanagati. And we can notice once again that it's not a form of knowledge that is inaccessible, right? It is not just found in the Vedas and the Vedas are just accessible for some people. No, and you don't even need to spend years learning scriptures and other texts in order to gain this knowledge. It is easy to gain, it is easy to realize, and it is accessible to everybody and open to everyone, just like the act of reaching Bhagavan's feet. You don't need to be a Vedic scholar to be able to do that. And then, what does he say on the means to moksha itself? Very quickly, the time is okay. Oh, foolish heart, he says, do not be troubled now, fearing that the foes that are the ancient karmas will rush and torture. Can there be sorrow after falling below the feet of the ocean-hued Lord, that's Narayana, and begging but once for refuge. So in this verse, Aruḻāḻa repeats the idea that surrender at his feet, at the feet of Bhagavan, ends sorrow. Here, that is referred to as ancient karma that tortures people. The karma is actually ancient because it is anadi, it is beginningless, and it doesn't actually even disappear during any of the pralayas because it just waits outside, and then when the pralaya is ended, the creation begins again, it just comes back and finds the right address and gets back to us and sticks to us. And the only remedy to get away from this horrible karma is the feet of the Lord, seeking out the feet of the Lord. Another important point that is made here about the nature of Sharanagati, I have put it in red. It is done once. You will only need to do it once. The later acharyas actually explicitly mention that you should do it only once, right? Doing twice will cancel the Sharanagati. So you do it once, it works. You do it twice, it'll cancel out the previous Sharanagati because it shows a lack of trust in the efficacy of the Sharanagati and that Bhagavan will protect you. It's as if you think that Bhagavan needs to be begged again and again. He doesn't understand or notice you in one go. So the later acharyas, at any rate, will say that you should do it only once, the Sharanagati. And then the next verse, maybe I won't read this out. Should I just the first line? He uses the word Sharanagati. I don't know if you can see it in Tamil, so it is spelled as Sharanagati, but that is Sharanagati. That's the first word of the verse. He further describes one important characteristic of Sharanagati in the first line. He says, if another means, meaning another means towards liberation, is embraced, surrender will not be a protection anymore. So once we do surrender, one cannot decide to adopt another means just in case. Like it's not as if somebody gets COVID and they take allopathic medicines and they think, oh, I'll also take homeopathy. It doesn't work with Sharanagati. Once you take refuge in Sharanagati, when you seek Sharanagati, you can't do Sharanagati twice, or even worse, seek out another means. And the next three lines, as you can't have another means as a backup, that doesn't work. The following three lines, he gives an example. It's an example from the Ramayana. You all know the Ramayana. When Hanuman is destroying the Ashokavana, Ravana sends Indrajit, and Indrajit ties up Hanuman with the Brahmastra, right? So out of respect for the Brahmastra, Hanuman just remains tied. But the other stupid Rakshasas turn up and they think that, oh my God, what if the Brahmastra, leaves? We should tie him up, and they tie him up with normal average ropes. And what happens is that the Brahmastra leaves, because either where the Brahmastra is and nothing else can be there because it is too proud. Similarly, Sharanagati is very proud in the sense that once you seek Sharanagati, you cannot show a lack of trust by backing it up with another means towards liberation. Okay, what does he say then? What are the other means towards liberation? For example, here he says, unless the feet of him, and then there are three epithets for Narayana, so I won't get into that. So unless the feet of him grant the Lord's feet, meaning, I'll continue reading. Is there a means of seeing them through karma and jnana yogas? We have to supply yogas. So who can grant Narayana's feet? Well, Narayana's feet themselves. Nobody else can grant you Narayana's feet other than themselves. So Narayana's feet are the goal that you need to achieve because they represent moksha. And what is the means to achieve the feet of Narayana? Narayana's feet. So Narayana's feet are both the goal and the means to achieve them. This is a theory that the later acharyas will develop considerably. Now, how about karma and jnana yogas? Well, they won't work. They simply cannot be efficient in this way, says this author. And another thing that we need to remember is that karma and jnana yogas, like bhakti yoga, require a practitioner to be a Traivarnika Upanita, right? But God's feet do not have such conditions. Anyone can go there. Also, later on, the theory that there is a theory that like really develops later on, that God's feet, actually the acharyas, the gurus who teach you, who put you in the path towards moksha, represent God's feet. So whenever God's feet are mentioned, they could be a reference to the acharyas. Maybe Aruḻāళar was thinking that. I'm not sure. The later commentator thinks so, but let's say that maybe he thought that. So in that case, God's feet giving themselves to people could also mean that the acharyas allow you to gain the Lord's feet. And many verses from the Jnanasaram, Prameyasaram show that the acharya has a very, very important role to play, like this verse, for example. Let me read the translation. That the feet of his Lord, who gave the faultless path of surrender, are the sole protection, is the true meaning treasured up in the unique four Vedas, and also what the blemishless treatise of Manu and so forth say. So this is something that Rāmānuja doesn't say all that very explicitly, but perhaps it was a thought in him that he communicated with his disciples. So Aruḻāla here introduces, as I said, this idea that even surrendering unto Narayana's feet requires someone to show that path. And that person here is likened to God himself. We see the word Irevan in Tamil. So you have to treat the acharya as your personal God. So there you go. It's the acharya's feet that you need to worship here, not even God's feet here. So it's very important because the later acharyas point out how it is difficult for people. It is easier to worship God, right? And it's much more difficult to bow down at another human being, So that's perhaps why he insists so much on treating the acharya with the utmost respect, putting him on par with God. And the later acharyas will also say, like, for example, Pillai that it is actually a very good thing to be born as a lower caste person, whatever that means, because this humility comes naturally. So they won't even hesitate to worship the acharya because, and that is something very, very good for their, the well-being of their soul. Anyway, I won't get into that either. There is this other verse which I won't read out. Time is ticking. The most important thing here is what I've put in red. He mentions the grace of a faultless teacher. So not any teacher. You can't just get hold of anybody who claims to be a teacher to know the truth. No. It works only when it's a faultless teacher. And then Manavala Mamunigal, a few centuries later, defines what a faultless teacher is. It is somebody who has proper jnana and anusthana. And when you seek out such a teacher, what happens? This is the last line. You will ascend into Vaikuntha and be suited for service there. As I said, Vaikuntha is not just to go and just enjoy life, but it is to go there and serve God without any limits for the rest of time. Now, let's turn our attention. We've seen so far what are the means to get there, right? And the Panchamopaya, the later acharyas actually refer to the Panchamopaya, which you saw in the verse dedicated to Aruļāḻa, Perumāļ, Emperumāṉār. The Panchamopaya is the grace of the acharya, the love of the acharya that takes you to moksha. It comes later. The whole theory, the philosophy is developed much later on. Okay, anyway, I should go on. Time is really ticking now. So we move on to the next part. So what are the obstacles to moksha? We've already seen how important it is to respect the acharya. So this verse says both types of inferior people who think lowly, that the teacher they think lowly of two kinds of things. First of all, they think that the teacher is a mere human. And the second thing that they have, the second thought that they have is the archa. Archa is, as you know, it's a manifestation, a concrete manifestation like a statue. That the archa form of Narayana, I'll skip that, is made of iron, will reach the lowest of hell at all times. So he puts it a parallel. Obviously, when you see a murti of a Swami, you don't say, that's made of metal. You don't say that. That's an evil thing to say. And secondly, the parallel is thinking that the acharya is just a human being is very, very similar. So once again, the parallel between the acharya who shows you the path towards moksha, and Bhagavan is there. And this is a very, very important idea later on. And even the very verses are taken up later on by Pillai. This is Pillai Sree Vachana Bhushanam, an exquisite text. We won't have the time to read much. It's an image that he borrows. I'll just read out. I know I'm going fast, but I only have 10 minutes left. So this image, I only read the translation here. What Pillai says this is, offenses against the Bhagavatas are of many types. Bhagavatas, devotees of Bhagavan. One of those, meaning offenses, is investigating their births. This is indeed more wicked than thinking of the material composition of the Archavatara. The scriptures consider that as the examination of one's mother's yoni. So he thinks that it's one of the worst possible things to do is to ask or try to find out what the varna of a devotee is. And he uses this very poignant image that Aruḻāḻa has to make a statement against caste-based discrimination when it comes to devotees. Anyway, time to move on. Other obstacles, we've already seen this jnana and karma yoga. You know, if you seek the jnana and karma yoga, they won't be able to help you. Besides which, they will also block Sharanagati. So you don't need to do that. And then there are other obstacles. There are three kinds of people who are losers in the sense that they're not going to get moksha if they continue to behave the way they do. Here's the verse. The first kind, those ignorant of the path to liberation. That's one kind. Oh, that could be still okay. The second path, the evil-minded people who do not go to and be in close union with those who do know. So, okay, you don't know about liberation, that's bad. You're not going to get liberation. But if you know, if you don't even go and seek somebody who knows about liberation, i.e. an acharya, well, that's too bad for you. And finally, the third category, those who do not trust God's words. Which God's words? Well, this is, I think, a reference, and the Vyakhyatas also think this is a reference to the Bhagavad Gita 1866, the very, very famous verse, Sarvadharman parityajya mamekam sharanam praja ham tva sarva papebhyo mokshayishyami ma shujah. I won't get into that. So somebody who fits into these categories, any of these three categories, is not going to get moksha. So it is very, very important to know about moksha, and for that you need to go and stay by the side of an acharya and learn to trust God's word, that he will protect you if you seek surrender in him. Another thing, final thing to notice here, caste and gender or social status or any such thing is not mentioned as a reason, as an obstacle for gaining moksha, right? What so far, whatever we know about Aruḻāḻa, whatever he says, nothing is explicit about caste, right? So far, that's true. But let's see how he proceeds later on. This is the third and final part. He gets to be very, very explicit. First of all, he establishes the distinction between body and the soul. And this is, I'm going to skip a few things because I think this single verse can say so much about the whole Vishishtadvaitic philosophical worldview, but I can't get into that. Let me just read the verse here. He says, I am no God, I'm not God, human, fauna, flora, or anything, but the lustrous soul, a servant of the feet of Narayana, the Lord of the beautiful divine woman upon the lotus, that is Sree Mahalakshmi. And who is this Narayana, apart from being the husband of this lady? The blemishless Lord, whose true nature is knowledge. Now, it doesn't explicitly mention moksha, but this verse is very important. As you can see, he clarifies that the body is not the soul. So he condemns in a way the dehatma abhimana, right? I'm not the body. So it doesn't in a way matter if I'm a snake or a worm or a tulsi plant or whatever, okay? Because I'm not the soul. And the next thing he says is what the soul is. The soul, he says, is a servant of Narayana. Okay, Rāmānuja in his text mentions in his major works that the individual soul's essential nature is jnatritva, knowledge, and kartritva, which is agency. But also in his Vedartha Sangraham, he suggests that there is a third part to it, which is sheshatva. Let's just translate this here as being devoted to Bhagavan. Okay, so here we have Aruḻāḷa mentioning that. For him, the most important part in the essential nature, that thing which defines a Jivatma, is being a servant of God. Okay, and then he says a few other things. For example, he gives a few qualities of Narayana, like being the husband of Lakshmi is actually used. Shriyapatitvam is something that proves that he's Sarveshwara. I won't get into that, but these are qualities, because Rāmānuja says Akhilaheya Pratyanika, that God is the opposite of everything that is flawed, everything, the opposite of flaws. And he also says that he's full of good qualities, endless good qualities. He lists many qualities, which is what Aruḻāḻa also does. Anyway, I think I'll have to go further because otherwise I'll never be done, and skip a few things. So here again, what do I have here? Again, he goes back to this dichotomy of body soul. Sorry, this thing. Will the pure-hearted people, he says, there are two categories of people. On the one hand, you have the pure-hearted people, to whom it has become clear that all the souls are servants of the Lotus Lady's Lord of old, meaning of Narayana. So will these people who are good, who understand that their souls are servants of Narayana, will they associate with the worldly people? So that's another dichotomy, another sort of people. And what about those people with whom? Because this is a rhetorical question, and the answer is no, you should not associate yourself with the other people. And the other kind of people are worldly people, he says, and not worldly in the sense that they like to drink and make merry and go to parties. No. It is people who are haughty, proud about their bodies, and bodies here means births. So they belong to a hierarchy, higher part of the upper hierarchy there due to their birth. So they are proud about that, despite having learnt much. So these are learned people, perhaps Brahmins, perhaps they are Vedic scholars, but they couldn't get rid of the pride. And the second thing is you have the comparison between the two kinds of knowledges. First of all, the very simple knowledge that all the souls are Narayana's servants. That makes you a pure-hearted person. You will go to moksha, as opposed to perhaps Vedic scholars who spent years learning the Vedas and reciting them and the meanings and the texts and the scriptures, but that learning is not going to be useful for them. Okay, and there's also something funny happening here, and that thing is that usually it's the upper class people who keep away the lower caste people, right? And here the Aruḻāḻa says, if you understand that we are all souls and not the body, because the other people just focus on the body and they say, oh, I was born in this body, I'm superior. You keep those people out. You stay away from those people. So it's sort of reverse exclusion, reverse discrimination. Okay, the next thing. Here, I think another verse in which Aruḻāḻa is explicitly revolutionary. Just remember that he was a Brahmin who faithfully and religiously followed a theistic Brahmanical tradition in the 11th, 12th centuries. So he asks this rhetorical question: what will you gain from discriminating based on the fourfold births, meaning jati, which arise? So how do these births arise? Which arise due to the body, which is a combination of the 5 elements. Look, the feet of Indira's king, meaning Narayana, alone are the refuge for any soul. So this rhetorical question is a direct call against discrimination based on one's birth. And later on, Mamuni says, what can you get by discriminating? He says it is ahankara hetu. It will cause you to be filled with ahankara, and therefore it will be anarthaka karam. So it will spell disaster for you. So basically, all the jivatmas, says Aruḻāḻa, without any difference of caste, gender, or even humanity, doesn't matter if you're not a human being. They're all equal before God and find refuge at his feet. And no qualification is required to know this fact or to access his feet and thereby achieve moksha. And then another very, I think, revolutionary thought here. So he says, for the servants of the Lotus Lady's Lord, their village, grama, lineage, gotra, and all these sort of things are based on their relationship to his feet, just as the name, nature, and all the distinguishing features of the water-abundant rivers on the earth vanish as they reach the sea. Gosh, I only have 1 minute left. So Another, as I said, revolutionary thought: the devotee's identity should be solely based on his being a devotee, on his Sheshatva. There is an allusion here, I think, to the Abhivadaye, which a man, a Trivarnika, I suppose, Trivarnika Upanita, says in order to introduce himself to an elder, in which he cites his Charana, Sutra, Gotra, etc. And later acharyas, like Pillai younger brother, in his Acharya Hridayam, for example, he says that for a devotee, meaning a Sri Vaishnava devotee, he says for the Brahmins, the Gotra, Charana, Sutra, Kutastha, etc., are Parashara, Parasharya, Bodhayana, etc. Whereas for those who belong to the group of Prapannas, meaning those people who have surrendered, the Sri Vaishnavas, it is Parankusha, so reference to Nammarvar, Parakala, Tirumangiyarvar, Yativarar, meaning Rāmānuja, etc. So the very identity of a devotee is based on the Arvas, the Acharyas, and God. So nothing to do with the body-based identities. It is soul-based. Once you're a devotee, the soul is the only thing that matters. It doesn't matter how high or low this birth is. The identity is linked to being a devotee of God. Everything else, every other identity is superficial or even incorrect, because you're this in this birth. In the previous and later births, probably you were something else. You are going to be something else. Okay, I think I'm reaching to the final part. No, it's actually my conclusion. So okay, no, actually I need to say a couple of things here very quickly. We have the simile. What I wanted to say about the simile of all the rivers might be red, black, tasty, not so tasty. But once first of all, they are just as useful. Okay, they feed people, etc. And so long as they're above the ground, so long as our bodies are visible in this samsara, they might look different, but they are still useful. But once they reach the ocean, they lose their identity, they become the ocean. Similarly, once all the devotees reach Bhagavan's feet, they just become simply his devotees. Okay, I think this river-based simile is already there in the Upanishads, but also in some Buddhist verses, I think. Just wanted to point out. Now, my final thoughts then. We can see that Aruḻāళa was quite the revolutionary of his own times, I think, given the fact that he was, as I said, a Brahmanical person. He belonged to a Brahmanical faith system. It was also theistic. So the hagiographies, as he state that he wrote these poems at the behest of Rāmānuja himself, having learned all the important meanings from Rāmānuja. So traditional accounts imply that Rāmānuja sort of spoke through him. It's his words that are coming out through Aruḻāళa. Maybe. So leaving aside hagiography, I think that a disciple probably would not have written anything widely different from what his teachers thought. So may I very cautiously suggest that even though Rāmānuja himself did not write much about this idea of equality as far as devotion to God and liberation are concerned, at least not very explicitly for various reasons, he may perhaps have embraced those ideas and communicated them to his disciples. Maybe I can put forth this idea. So maybe there are some bases to the claims made by the hagiographies that Rāmānuja was indeed very broad-minded, inclusive, a benevolent leader, who deserves this, more than deserves this Samata Murti. So anyway, whichever way, Aruḻāళa was a very influential thinker, as I hope to have shown you, even though briefly, and yet very little is known, as Shashikalaji pointed out, outside the Sampradaya. In the Sampradaya, he is very well known. So I think it's really time that his verses be given the recognition that they rightly deserve. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you for your interesting and thought-provoking paper. Now the floor is open for discussion.